Hey, sheepdogs, I want to talk a little bit about who do I want to be as a police officer, and to maybe spark a thought for you about who do you want to be as a police officer. And so it's something that I think about quite a bit. I've been beside the badge for a long, long time. And now that I am behind one, I want to be certain things. And I never want to lose the empathy, and I never want to lose my heart. I always want to be the chaplain, but I also want to be excellent backup. I want to be the guy that, in law enforcement, if you don't have the gear with you, it might as well be on Jupiter. If you don't have the equipment close to hand, it might as well not be there. I keep a glass breaker on me with a seatbelt cutter, and I've got a little flashlight pouch that is set up for mauling, and it just sneakily goes right on the side of my vest, and I've got that right there, and so it lets me get a hold of that. And there's just little things that I can carry on body. I keep hard armor with me at all times when I'm on duty, and I have to move things around. Typically, and it's my goal, is to be in the passenger seat on duty. Now, there will be times that I'll be primary, but that's not why I went into law enforcement. I went into law enforcement because it gives me more of an opportunity to be the chaplain that I am. And a lot of guys talk about how having company makes a shift go so much faster. Having a believer in the seat next to them lets them off gas and just talk about life and kids and marriage and love and whatever the heartaches are at work. And that terrible thing they saw the other day and how Karen went off on them. That's a ministry of presence. That's who I want to be as a police officer. But I carry that hard armor, and I set it down in the floorboard to where I can just reach down and pick it up and put it on and have it ready to rock. I keep it with me. And then there's actually a secondary drop leg with that. And I'll probably take some static for it, but not in this environment, but from some in law enforcement that I know, because my generation would call me Tackleberry, because of being like super prepared. And I'm not gung-ho and overboard like the cliche Tackleberry, but I want to be ready, and I want to have the equipment with me, and I want to be mentally prepared for whatever. So the kind of officer I want to be, I got to be that a couple days this weekend. I went out Saturday and Sunday with different departments and different officers, and at this medical call I was at, I got to pray with a family. They had loaded up an individual to take them to the hospital, and I was doing the administrative side of things while the officer I was with, who is also a God-fearing man, a believer, what he was doing was he was being the heart of law enforcement, and he was comforting this person and talking to him and stay with me, and he was there doing that. And so I shifted, and that's a big thing with me. You've heard me talk about having shift in your mind, to where a lot of times I shift focus, and you've got to be able to shift in that moment. You're not a bystander, and if you're not actively being that person, then be whatever else is needed. And they really hammered home to us in the academy with our paramedic instructor. He's like, the one thing that I need the most is to know if they have allergies. He's like, that's above their social, their birth date, any of it. I need to know, do they have allergies? Because we don't want to give them something that could actually hurt them. So I don't care about anything else. What are they allergic to? So I got those details, and I was able to get birth date and all those different details, and one parent loaded up to go with this individual, and then I was able to actually minister to a grandparent and open up prayer. And I said, hey, no pressure. I was in an area where I knew there were a lot of Christians in this parking lot, just due to where and what was going on. And I said, hey, no pressure. I'm an officer, but I'm also the department's chaplain, and I would love to pray with you. And the lady's like, absolutely. And I looked over, and I just kind of knew, I think it was God. And so I was like, hey, you look like a pastor. And he laughed, and he wasn't how he was dressed. I think it was God. And he laughed and said, yeah. And I said, I would And they're like, he's our pastor. And I said, okay, I would love to open and I'd love to have you close. Well, you just about can't pray too much. And so I loved that, and I got to do that. I'm really big on being the chaplain. But over the same 2 days with 3 or 4 different officers, I'd have to stop and think about it, I got to be not only the chaplain, but I got to be backup, and going into environments where there's been a domestic and you're in the kitchen and you're keeping somebody occupied and there's a knife rack and all kinds of different things that you're watching for. A rolling domestic at one point, and an alarm call where we went in, and I was actually able to go through the building. I've cleared a number of buildings on both sides of the badge, but this time I was able to do it with an officer I've never cleared before with. I never cleared a building with that officer before. And I want to be the kind of backup, and this was formulative for me. This kind of came into being over the weekend. So I remember hearing a guy's voice over the radio one time, and knowing that he was coming. This has actually happened several times when I was there as the chaplain and I was backing an officer who was very alone, and they're like, watch my back. So before I ever carried a commission, and I remember hearing this man's voice over the radio that he was almost arriving. He was about to arrive, and going, oh, thank God, because he wasn't as a solid cop, and I knew that the odds were about to shift in our favor. And I want to be that officer. I don't have to be the best. I'm certainly not the brightest. But I want to be that officer. And when people hear my voice over the radio, and I try to be the guy that I've got extra gloves. I don't know how many times I've gone to a medical call and as a chaplain, and I had extra gloves in a med bag, and officers would just reach over to get the gloves from me because they would have run out, and they would have forgotten that they ran out in their bag, but they knew that I would have extra gloves on me, and it continues now that I am commissioned. And so I want to be the believer who's not afraid to pray, who's not afraid to ask God, who's not afraid to say, and I was able to turn to an individual at a bad situation recently and say, hey, I know you want to go to the hospital, you're going to follow the ambulance. It might be best that you not drive because you're going to be trying to communicate with people, you're going to be on the phone, and you might miss something, and the last thing that they would want is you to be involved in an accident as well. That's a God thing, to where in those moments to be able to say that in love and for somebody to receive it, because you never know, it might prevent an accident, to be mindful. And I was party to an arrest. Backup as an officer, and I was just going through an area where they were trying to move something, and I was being signaled. I was getting mixed signals about what to do, and they laughed and were motioning me to come on through. But I was backing an officer on an arrest, and I stepped out behind him as he brought the individual around the vehicle. It was at night, and I call them light puddles. There's no patent pending on that, so run with it. But I take my flashlight and I create a light puddle behind the officer. People don't want to drive in that light puddle. I don't know what it is. They're afraid it's going to get on their tires or something. They're afraid that I'm trying to show them a piece of debris in the road. I don't know what it is. People don't like to drive in light puddles. And of course, on the other side of that light puddle is an officer, and of course that officer may have reflective gear on, but people don't see. Sometimes they don't think. And so I create these light puddles, and I did that and was keeping people off of his back. I try to be excellent backup, and I don't have to be, like I told an officer the other day that I have nothing but respect for his driving skills and that of his chief. They are phenomenal behind the wheel, and you know who you are. They are amazing during pursuits, and they are amazing running code. And I mean, I've driven over 100 miles an hour now as law enforcement, but I probably will never be their skill level, but I don't have to be, because I truly do not believe God called me to be in this seat as a police officer. He called me to be in that seat. I am there to be backup, and my goal is to be the best backup possible. And having built-in backup to where they know, and I cannot tell you how many times I've had officers tell me that it's incredibly comforting for them to know that I'm watching their back, because I don't know how many times I've been watching an officer's back and seen something and pointed, and somebody trying to sneak off, somebody trying to palm something, and so I want to be excellent backup. I want to be somebody that can help de-escalate situations. What I don't want to be is that guy, and we all know, if you've worked around law enforcement very long, there are individuals that are in law enforcement that they've either lost their way, and I say that humbly, or they never really had it. And they escalate situations unnecessarily. When they arrive, they make it worse. And I don't want to be the road flare to anyone's gasoline. I want to be, and I don't know what the chemical would be that takes away the flammable nature of gasoline. I want to be there to de-escalate. We win 100% of the fights that we don't fight. I want to be that guy. But I was there for an arrest the other day where a guy, with the whole time he was getting arrested, he just promised my partner that he was going to kick his butt. And my partner was like, okay. And, and stand up, turn around. And the guy's telling him this, and I start moving deck chairs back. We were on a patio, and I start moving these back to give us room to dance. If we're going to dance, we need room to dance. And I think the guy kind of saw that. Neither one of us got freaked out about it. Neither one of us got mad about it. The officer I was with is a very capable fighter. And I'm no slouch. I mean, in a slap fight, I'm good for the first 3 or 4 cheerleaders. So I don't know that I'm his level of fighter, and probably never will be, but I am there to be good backup, and we win 100% of the fights we don't have to fight. And so I want to be that officer. I also want to be the officer that can give the dad talk. There was a young lady the other day that somebody that she was in a relationship with was getting arrested, and she was standing outside in the cold. And I said, hey, you can tell me to kick rocks, but I don't know if you have anybody in your life that can speak truth to you. And she's like, no, go ahead, please. I think I probably need it. And who knows if she'll listen. I've interacted with her a couple times since, and she doesn't seem to be learning, but hey, you try. And I said, you shouldn't have to stand outside of your dwelling at night in the cold while law enforcement are going in to arrest your boyfriend. That shouldn't have to happen. I want to be able to be that cop. Now, whether they listen or not is on them. I spoke to a lady recently about a terrible situation I went to where a lady was beaten severely, and the man is in prison, and the details of it are so grisly. Like, I just touched on them with this lady. They're several years removed. She's not going to know who it is. And I said, I don't want to see that happen to you. I said, it's tough to come into an environment like that and find somebody dead. I've talked to too many officers that have done it. I've dealt with death, not that way yet. It probably will happen. And so it ended up being a fantastic conversation about life and I told a young lady recently, do you have family you can go to? Because she seems to be running with the wrong people, and it constantly seems to be getting her in trouble, or at least she's present for things that are happening. And I'm like, do you have family that you can go to? I've heard amazing dad talks where officers have told young men, what you're doing is leading to a path of destruction. You're going to end up getting yourself put in prison, or you're end up dead. What you're doing is not going to end well. They were able to give a fantastic dad talk and to be thanked afterwards. I want to be that cop. I was dealing with a traffic stop the other day, and I'm the backup watching 2 young men, and they got a citation. And once it was over, as I was walking away, one of the young men in the passenger seat leaned out the window and said, hey, it was nice meeting you. And I'm not even remotely can every contact with the public be like that. I get it. I'm not naive to that. I'm not oblivious to that. But what about the ones that can? What about the ones where we can genuinely help somebody? And I know that's tough. I mean, finding a win in law enforcement is tough. But I want to be that officer that in the moment, when able, I take the time to speak life. I call it verbal CPR. I want to be that officer. And I recently was offered a full-time position. I was deeply, deeply honored at a facility that has full-time law enforcement. It's law enforcement. It's not security. And I was grateful for it, to be given the nod for that. It's not my calling, but I want to be the kind of officer that other officers would say, that guy's crazy. He really loves God. He's just a good cop. Like, he doesn't put on airs, which brings me to I want to be humble. I want to be teachable, and I try to be that guy. Like, I had an officer the other day. He's like, well, Paul, you already know everything. And I'm like, ha, not even close. And he laughed. And I said, dude, I don't think I'm a third of a cop. I'm trying, I'm learning, I'm changing, I'm adapting. And I will turn to other officers. Some of them are young enough to be my kids, but they've been a cop for a while. And I will say things like, hey, this is a teaching moment. What would you do in a situation like this? And I may not have done it their way. Sometimes years and wisdom come into play where I've lived life a while, but there's also things that they've been taught by other people that I go, that was good stuff. I'm going to use that. And I want to be that guy. I want to be teachable, and I'm determined to stay humble. I want to be the guy that's super high speed, where I'm good at what I do, but I'm humble enough to learn and adapt. There's few things more frustrating than dealing with somebody that was once an expert on a topic and they've just not stayed current, but they're not teachable. And we all know people that even if they were never an expert, and especially if they were never an expert, they're just not teachable. And to me, they're dangerous, and I don't want to be dangerous, And I've had several people turn to me, and that's who I strive to be, where they turn to me and they go, I love working with you because we can just work off of each other so well. And I know you've got my back. You're not going to escalate unnecessarily. You'll jump in if I need you. And I try to flow. I try to be like water. You put water into an object and it conforms to that space. So, you pour water into a cup or a bowl or a pan or, whatever, and it forms itself to the shape of the object. In an environment like that, I want to flow to where I'm needed, is where I'm going with that. I want to flow to where I'm needed. So I think one of the worst things I could do is what I witnessed at a really bad situation once, where there was an officer that needed assistance. That officer needed assistance. And a first responder was walking by, and an officer at the scene said, hey, I need you to sit with this officer. And the response was basically, screw you. What? I don't want to be that guy, and it breaks my heart when I see people in any environment that they're above that. I'm not above that. I'm here to help. And I think it's easy to lose our way. I think it's easy to decide that we're too high speed for that or whatever. And I think that's tragic. I think that's absolutely a tragedy. It's a travesty when we do that. And I don't want to be that guy. I want to be the guy that's addicted to training. I want to be the guy that is in love with training and learning and adapting and changing. And I have been blessed in the short time now that I've been in law enforcement. There's been several things that I've done with my gear where I've looked at what a lot of people do and my own unique way of looking at things, because the departments I work with let me load out my gear the way I want. And so when I go into these rural environments where there's not a lot of cops, and you may be, like a guy commented the other day, he's like, you carry a lot of magazines. He wasn't law enforcement, and I said, my goal is to be good backup, and some of the environments that I go into, backup maybe 20 minutes away or more. And he's like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And I said, I try to be prepared for everything. I was like, 95% of what I do is not anything like that, but in the likelihood that it is, I want to be ready. So may the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you. Remember Semper Disciplina, that lifestyle of discipline training. God bless.